Hello, everyone, and happy Latinx History Month, which begins today. Thank you for carving out time from your very packed schedules to join us for yet another month of Inspire Live, the series where we bring together the HR community and experts to share tips and strategies for those things that are keeping all of us up at night. You can listen, of course, to past episodes on our website, or if you're more of a podcast person on the go, you can always catch our episodes for your favorite streaming platform under Inspired. In case you're not familiar with Inspire HR, we are celebrating our 15-year anniversary, and we are proud to include a team that sits across 12 states of 30 plus HR experts who together have done all things HR. We partner with companies, typically chief people officers, to help them in one of four ways: HR business partner work, talent management, total rewards, or talent acquisition. And we typically dive in to do either kind of an interim role if someone is out on leave, or perhaps there's an open role, or secondly, we're brought in to provide a dedicated resource for lean teams that need to do key initiatives. We're finding more and more in this volatile economy that we're in that organizations are now really looking to have this type of model where there's, of course, the permanent team, but in addition, a group of fractional resources that they can bring in so that their organization can kind of expand and contract as the economy is just teaching us all sorts of stuff as we go. We are very much in flux. So what I'd love to do is very much dive into HR opportunities and challenges for high growth companies, which is why we're here today. High growth companies have a very specialized need. There's this range of needs, from kind of scaling the culture, from that original founder vibe, right? Scaling the culture, to always being on the lookout for merger acquisition activity, and also leaning into all the change management best practices that as the company introduces all these, developments and HR initiatives, the organization is kind of right there with them. And we're finding that in this climate where the economy is in flux, that there's even more disruption for that day-to-day for HR leaders, executives, for people like you. But you do not need me to tell you this, which is why we've assembled our team of experts to really walk us through some of the key areas. So we'll be joined in this dialogue with them. Nettie is a Chief Learning and Leadership Officer at Saterman Connect, which helps companies evolve their cultures. And as the Chief Learning and Leadership Officer, we're in great hands with her for tons of innovative ideas. Krupa, the VP of People and HR at Sapphire Ventures, which is a VC firm with a portfolio of high-tech B2B companies. And Sean is an Inspire expert with Inspire, who has decades of experience as a senior HR leader and specifically helping in that scaling stage of growing companies. Nettie, Krupa, Sean, thank you so much for being here. We are in very good hands with you. And I'd love to just dive right in. So, we think about all the challenges that kind of stand out for HR in that high growth stage. I want to start with the cup being half full. I want to start with all the opportunities. So from talent acquisition to total rewards, talent management, or any people management function, I'd love to hear from each of you to kind of set the table. What are the top opportunities for immediate or kind of long-term impact when an organization is rapidly scaling? And Krupa, could you kick us off, please?
Sure. That's such a great question. Thank you, Jamie, for having me and for letting me start with this question. So to me, I think the top opportunities for long-term impact focus on two things. The first is things that we may have previously done, whether ad hoc or informal, prior to high growth mode, is one thing, ensuring that we now have structure in place, as well as ensuring we have enough resources to support the significant growth. So for example, looking at things like onboarding or even performance reviews, if these were less structured, done in an ad hoc way, now is not the time to keep it ad hoc. It's important to be able to have process that your employees and potential candidates can look to. What attracted people to join our company and our culture, and things that we want to continue to highlight, are things that we need to consciously focus on. And in order to do that, we need to be more thoughtful about how we make those things happen. When I mention resources, I think about the HR team, the people team. Typically, some HR teams are 1 to 2 people, and there usually isn't enough capacity to do it all and to do it all really well. So partnering with other organizations to help us deliver on whether it's training or adding to our employee engagement, not being shy about utilizing and partnering with other resources in order to make it a great experience.
That's a very modern way. It's like this elastic resource mindset. And I think that is, it's like, how do you keep up with all the scaling and all the demand all at once? Sean, Nettie, any thoughts from you?
Yeah, that's the thing I would add, and thank you also from me for the opportunity to be here today. I would add just the word culture. It's cliche, but it's cliche for a reason. You really have to make sure that you have alignment, that you have consistency, and that you build everything that you're building off of a consistent culture. If you have people all pulling in the same direction, measuring the same things, the same values, etc., it's going to make things happen a lot smoother. It's going to make growth happen a lot easier. You just have to have that alignment. You have to have clarity for what people are driving towards. I think that makes a huge difference just to set you up with a strong foundation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Jamie, I'd love to add to that, and thank you as well for letting me be here today. Sean, I really appreciate the comment around culture, because from our lens, the other thing that we think about is diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And if we think about the Gen Zs, millennials, they're very much looking for that in an organization. Even sometimes more than what's their salary going to be like, what's the company culture like in terms of the D&I space that they're in. And as the company's looking to scale, how do you talk about that or show that on your website, in your job descriptions, during the talent acquisition process, and then make sure that it continues as they join the company, and that the company is really focusing on creating that as well.
Such a good point. Everything from including pronouns, in the, pre-pandemic, you would always have candidates come into the lobby and for them to see a gender neutral bathroom, like things like this just really set the tone. But I think there are things that we can do that are very intentional during the TA process for sure. So let's now look at the flip side. What are some of kind of the pitfalls that HR leaders, founders should watch out for when their company is rapidly scaling? I'd love to hear, this is not your first rodeo. Like, what are the lessons learned from your experience that we can share with the group? Sean, if we can start with you.
Yeah, the thing that I've heard too often is about people being good for the role they're in, but not able to grow as the company grows. And so kind of replacing and layering over people as company grows. And so, the tip for that is to develop for your future, hire for your future, develop for your future. Don't just hire and develop for the jobs that people have today, but start to prepare them for growth. So that way you're mixing in, you're still going to mix in external hires, you're still going to mix in expertise and talent as you grow, but also look for ways to give mini stretches to people as you're thinking about that growth happening. Put people in uncomfortable situations to test them and to see if they're going to be able to step up as growth happens, and find ways to test out skills beyond what they're doing today. And again, that's going to put you on a fast track to be able to balance the external need to bring in new talent and talent that can help you scale, but also really keep the strong base that you've built.
Smart. And I think it's, when we as hiring leaders are looking to, fill that role, I think you raised such a good point. Like, there's a tendency to say like, well, what are like the 20 things that we need to accomplish now? But it's really about having that forward-looking lens. They don't just have the ability to perform, but also the potential for wherever the company is going to go. Smart.
Yeah. I'd love to add that there needs to be process in place and frameworks. And I think that's where many companies are catching up. Like, all of a sudden we're like 200 people, now we're 500 people, but the process isn't there. So, you're running into snags, especially if there's not standard operating procedures. As new talent comes on, they don't know how to do something. And where I've seen the biggest challenge is really around technology, HRIS systems. Oh, we're still using Excel spreadsheets, or, Google Drive has everything in it versus really thinking about how are you going to manage technology investments for the growth of the company versus all of a sudden realizing, oh my God, we have to spend $1 million now, and it's going to take us a year to get that technology in place. So that would be another area that I've seen high growth companies really try to manage and not do a great job in.
One more thing I would add to that, along with what Nettie was saying, is in terms of process, also, providing a consistent experience for your employees, and whether that's something like your annual review process, keeping that in line, being vocal, being transparent about what that looks like. When we think about companies that are focused on high growth and focused on we need to hire X number of employees to meet our goals, but it's also about, well, we have a great set of employees that are here. So how are we helping to retain them, support them in their success, support them in their additional new responsibilities that they're taking on? What does that look like? And so while we may be only focused on growth, I think it's important for all of us as leaders to also go back and look at, like, what did we set ourselves up for at the beginning of the year? What did we say were our OKRs or things that we wanted to accomplish? And how often do we go back and look at that? Not to say, it's set in stone, but really just to give ourselves and our executive leadership team, are we checking to see that we're in alignment with our organization's goals, what we're looking to accomplish, and are we on track to be able to do that, or do we need to pivot because of new circumstances that have arisen?
And I think it's such a good point. It's so basic. It costs, as growing organizations that are so stretched for time and resources, it costs us nothing, right? Like, you don't have to take people on an offsite to Santa Fe. Well, that would always be great, but just doing a centering with folks, with ideally quarterly, if not monthly, right? Just to kind of sit with them and say, in Q1 we set these goals, and this is kind of how we're tracking. And I think that sometimes what I hear our clients say is that they're hesitant sometimes to give an update because maybe things aren't as on track as they'd hoped. Maybe they haven't progressed some of the more qualitative goals, or maybe quantitatively, revenue wise, things might not be there. But I just always say, sunlight is the best disinfectant. The best thing you can do is share with your folks exactly where you are, because it centers them and it gives them direction. I don't, in a lack of information, I think by human nature, we kind of assume the worst. We kind of fill in the blanks for ourselves. So I love this point about going back to the goals.
Jamie, can I add one more piece? Because I think that the communication piece that you've kind of referenced here is critical. Town halls, making sure that information is cascading, especially when you're in a hybrid or remote environment, you feel like you're missing out on things. But I think the other piece that I want to mention is onboarding and scaling a company. Onboarding is critical. And as you go from 25 or 50 people, it's a lot easier to start to know who everybody is and to kind of fill them in. But as you're growing and you're moving from 200 to 500 to 750 to 1,000, you really need to think about a couple of things. One, how are you getting people, up and ready to be productive in their jobs? How do you get people to really know and understand who the company is so they can talk about it? And the third thing is, as the company gets bigger, I remember I worked at Toast a number of years ago, and I remember Chris Comparato, who was the CEO, finally mentioning it because they were a rapidly growing startup. It's like, I don't know who everybody is anymore. And I think that new hires want those connections as well, because as you join, you start seeing all these people and you want to meet and you need to network within the company. And I think that's also really, really important in a pitfall I've seen.
Absolutely. And I think that founders, I think that they feel a guilt, like they miss it on a personal level, but they feel a guilt because they also feel like some of the secret sauce that got people excited to join was their vision. And clearly many times they're very charismatic. And so it's like, how do you kind of bottle that, if you will, and kind of spread out? Some of our clients have created, videos of just the founders talking, or come up with a schedule of where videos do, more intimate meetings with smaller groups. But there are successful ways to definitely keep that energy going. Before we go further, I'd love to get just a better sense of the structure of the HR departments at the companies of the folks who are joining us today. So we're going to launch another poll. This one is less about fall flavors. It's more about which best describes the structure of your HR department. I know we have folks here from lots of small companies, and there's a variety of HR structures. They're represented here. And while the poll is coming together, I'd love to hear, oh yeah, look at this. Yeah, so yep, 33% growing fast as the company scales and have kind of an established HR department, but very few folks are kind of a department of one. Okay, so we have folks who are kind of drinking water from a fire hose, if you will, and really growing as the organization does, and most likely adding on other HR roles as needed. So I want to really hone in on talent development and talk about what are some of the ways that leaders at these rapidly scaling companies can bake in inclusive learning and development practices from from the start. So Nettie, if you can kick this one off, please.
Yeah, thank you. I love to talk about talent development. So I did mention onboarding before, and we actually call it beyond boarding. So what we do is we'd love to have companies think about pre-boarding. What are you doing to touch potential candidates? What does your website say? What type of inclusive language are you using? What is the recruiter, the hiring manager doing? Even the interview panels to avoid bias, to, overlook resumes that have come in because you're just scanning it and maybe that person doesn't have a college degree, but they have everything else. So I think that, during that talent acquisition stage is such an important piece to create that feeling of belonging and inclusion for the organization. And then don't drop the ball, from the time that somebody has accepted the job and the paperwork is starting to go through and their first day, make sure that whatever that experience is, whether it's virtual or it's on site, that, you've stayed in touch with them and you have really created this feeling that they can't wait to be there on day one. And then day one is planned and the rest of the week is planned and you have a whole plan for onboarding. So that would be one of the first areas. I think the second area is leadership and management development. As we're growing companies, two things are happening. One, we're taking individual contributors who are subject matter experts and we're making them leaders and managers, and they have no clue how to do it. Or you're bringing in people from the outside and they've managed in a different company, a different culture, but they haven't managed in your company. So creating some kind of foundation of a very strong management and leadership development training program initiative is really critical in helping managers to understand what they need to do, what they need to say, how to manage a remote workforce if they've never done that before.
Sure.
How do they work with and coach new hires? So I think when it comes to that, it could be a department of one. You can bring in resources and consultants to help you. But those are two really key components in terms of talent development that I think that rapidly growing companies just really need to put a pin on and make sure that they're doing that.
I love that you're focusing on that, because so many times I think for companies, once that person arrives, what goes through the hiring leader's mind is, oh, thank God you're here. I now have someone to delegate to, and finally I can get back to all the responsibility that I have. And I hire them because they know what to do. So of course they'll just run with it. And the psychology, I think, of a new hire is they're still figuring out if they made the right decision. I mean, like, as much as they might have posted on LinkedIn that they joined, there always, I think, is the little bit of that hesitancy where they're still they're sussing you out. They just are. And I think it's important that we know, even in this economy with things in flux, how how much we need to treasure these new hires, because there is such infrastructure to get them in the door. I think we need that equal infrastructure and intention to make them feel that sense of belonging from go.
Yeah,
Such good points.
absolutely. Thanks.
Such good points. Krupa,
Yeah, can I just add something to
please.
that too? I think it's important to just be vocal about it too. Jamie, you alluded to this in the last question about, do companies have town hall meetings and kind of talk about with their progress? And I think this is one of those things where this is not something that should be kept a secret. We should talk about it with our employees. We should talk about it with our potential candidates about all the things that we are doing, and that we still have a long ways to go if there's more action items that we want to work on. So for us at Sapphire, we do a town hall, or we do a full firm-wide town hall at least 2 to 3 times a year, and each group sort of gives updates. And for me, a lot of it is about letting managers know and letting employees know that yes, we have a whole cohort and series of workshops that we offer firm-wide. Everyone is able to participate and should participate. But that message also stems from the top. Our leaders participate in all of our inclusion and DE&I training. And so when you see the set of partners at your firm attending and moving meetings around to attend, I think it also gives importance to employees too, to say, what, this is important here. And if it's important to our senior leadership team, then I should participate as well. None of this stuff is secretive. And so I think the more we can talk about it, the important it is to get that awareness out there. One of our portfolio companies does a great job about having a place on their website where they talk all about their DE&I goals and where they are year over year, what they've done to attract talent, retain talent, what they're doing within their local communities. And that sort of sense of inclusivity, belonging has really driven up sort of their recruiting numbers. They've had a number of additional hires join just because of how vocal and forthcoming they are with all the things that they do within their organization.
I love, and that for me is kind of best in class to really have an organ. I love when on this at our series, we can really share the best and brightest ideas. And for me, that is one. Several of our clients have an actual diversity report. They might have a diversity office. On the other end of the spectrum, there might be organizations that just talk about it in town halls. There's lots of space in between, but I think being intentional, and if there is an internal dialogue about weaving DEIB into the whole employee life cycle from, talent acquisition all the way through the elegant exit, succession planning, development. We need to, I always say what gets measured gets done, right? So if you can be vocal about what that talent strategy is, and then very much give yourselves as an organization some goals against it, and then report back to folks on how you're doing. Yeah. And again, I think that sometimes companies are hesitant to do the innovative thing that you mentioned one of your firms does, because they feel like they haven't figured it all out. And my posture is we're all a work in progress, and to state your intention and that we're working on it, I think goes a long way. And folks want to work at a place where, they see a little bit of their fabulous self there. So to see the leaders very much also have diverse lived experiences, I think is also really impactful. Oh, Nettie, please.
Yeah. Krupa, thank you for talking about DEI and be that way. One of the things that it made me think about is, as a company is starting to grow, they're looking, to hire more diverse candidates, which I'm sure Sean can talk to in terms of that. Where are you recruiting from? But what I really made me think about was, if you don't know where to begin, start a DEI council. Pick a sponsor, usually it's the head of HR, and identify a group. And it can be very grassroots to think about, what do we want to measure? What do we want to do? Let's create a charter. Let's create, roles and responsibilities around that. And then as you get larger and larger, you can start creating either business or employee resource groups that help to bring a voice to our, marginalized communities or our underserviced communities, and have them integrate and talk and align and share knowledge and information around that as well. So.
+1 to all of that. I loved all of those points. Thank you.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add is that the HR function itself needs to demonstrate inclusivity.
Mhm.
It needs to ask, right? You'd never go to market with a product without understanding what your customers wanted. And as an HR function, we should do the same thing. We need to understand what our employees want, listen to all of the voices, and be open about it, especially in smaller companies that are adding HR or it's a new function. HR has happened before you got there. It just happened in weird ways, and people got involved. And it was a lesson learned for me. People in the engineering team were designing career paths and things like that. It's important to not have those folks feel that it's being taken away as HR scales and HR takes more ownership of development and planning. And so, if you want your NPS as an HR function to be as high as possible, the best way to do it is to ask people what they want and to really involve them in your decision making.
Yes, to the Net Promoter Score. Absolutely. And I know that we received some questions before today's session. If folks have questions, please pop them in the chat, because we'll leave a couple of minutes at the end to go ahead and ask our panelists. So shifting gears, I'd love to talk a little bit about innovation, because we have folks here with us who are, at organizations that might not have, large budgets. They might have just gone through a hiring freeze themselves in HR. All sorts of things are going on. So let's get scrappy. I'd love to share one innovative thing that you have seen private equity or, venture-backed firm do across the whole portfolio. Because what we've seen with so many of our clients that are PE firms or venture capital firms are starting to have more intention about doing a set of innovative things that they can really sprinkle across all of those organizations so that it feels like a consistent experience. So could I hear from each of you at least one innovative thing that you've seen done? And Krupa, if we can kick it off with you.
Sure. So at Sapphire, we have an amazing dedicated portfolio support team that works with all of our portfolio companies across different verticals, whether it's HR or business development or revenue generation. We are here to help support them. And so we do a lot of things in terms of roundtables, webinars, provide a lot of consultative conversations with them. We've created playbooks for them in terms of articulating a compensation philosophy or navigating through a layoff or a RIF. So really just being a true partner to that organization and providing them with a lot of resources. And most often, many portfolio companies are experiencing or have similar questions around the same topic. And so that's when the roundtables or the webinars or even our each vertical has their own specific Slack channel. So the HR leaders at the portfolio companies have a Slack channel. They can all communicate with each other. And so I think this goes back to the point about being intentional and just being a really good partner to the companies that you are working with.
I love this. And how often does your group get together for these roundtables?
Depending on what service line it is. So for example, the HR division, I would say, gets together at least 4 to 8 times a year. It really depends on the topic. But the Slack channel is pretty active. The playbooks are there. There's a lot of the one-on-one conversations that we have with individual portfolio companies. So we may not do, a lot of roundtables more than 8 times a year because they're pretty big to put together. But the ones that we do, do get a lot of attention because it's of topics of interest to all of them.
That's great. Well, kudos to you for the various PE firms that we work with. I can't think of many that have done that 8 times a year. It's more like once a quarter. So well done. You've a great HR leader at Sapphire. What I would you want to say is that it is such a gap, I think, for the HR leaders at these small organizations. It can get lonely. Like it just is hard when you're a team of one or, when it's a lean but mighty team. So I love that you're creating that community and that you're doing it with that type of, that you're doing it that often. I think that's great. And then I love that they're keeping in touch in between, right? Because they're all, I would imagine many of them are wrestling with the same thing. But I think what folks now need more than ever, especially in these volatile times and these times where we're virtual, is just that sense of belonging and community among their peers. So I love that that you have that in place. Nettie, Sean, other innovative ideas from your perspective? Yeah,
I was with a client a couple of weeks ago, and she was so excited that the PE firm that owns them, and obviously many other organizations, is having an HR conference for their HR leaders. So bringing
Mhm.
all of them to headquarters and building out opportunities, not only for networking, because I think what Krupa was saying is critical. You need those other folks that are part of your organization to talk to, especially if you're a 1 or 2 person department, but then also to think about, how are we going to grow and as a PE firm, understanding what they want of us in terms of that as well. So she was super excited to do that. And I think her conference is next month. So I'm excited to hear what she comes back with.
Love it. Love it. And those are, I did a keynote for one of those types of gatherings back in May, and you could just see the body language in the room. People were thrilled because they'd only seen each other, from like the shoulders up for 2 years, but they were thrilled to be in the same room and just feel that, that they weren't the only one dealing with whatever it might be. And also to have the portfolio company leaders there also. I think that you could tell they all just kind of set up a little bit straighter when they came in, and just for that leader to share their mission, their values, and what they expect, the integrity that they want to see across the portcos, I think was really helpful. And just to understand the vision of the PE firm for their growth, again, just to kind of connect it all together. Sean, over to you. I know we have done work together on many PE firms. Any wisdom, innovation that you've seen across our various clients?
Yeah, I think kind of building on that, it's thinking about talent management at a portfolio level, not an individual company level. You do it within the company, but especially in more of the specialized functions, people are going to top out pretty early in their careers in the smaller companies. But if you're viewing it at a portfolio level and you're cross-pollinating, you're giving people opportunities to move from company to company and challenging and stretching them, I've seen it work extremely well, both from a talent perspective, but also operationally. Right now I'm on the second year of a significant acquisition, working with ST6 and TA Associates. And they brought over the CFO from the acquisition last year. And having been through that experience, the speed with which we're operating, the efficiency with which we're operating, significantly better because that person has that experience under their belt already. So, not only do you gain, kind of inspiration for the talent to be able to get these different experiences, but you also can become better operationally as people learn from the experiences they have in one entity to take to another.
So innovative. I love the idea of kind of cross-pollinating and importing and exporting talent across these organizations. Okay, we're going to dive into another poll. We want to ask some thoughts on the how your talent strategy has changed due to the economic slowdown that we find ourselves in. If we were to have done this panel in Q1, it would just be a different dialogue in a lot of ways, but so much has happened in the last couple of months with the US economy very much in flux. So I want to get a sense of how this is impacting folks. There is definitely a bit of whiplash, I think, going on for so many of our chief people officers because they're having to deal with the economic slowdown, potential hiring freezes. At the same time, they're also still trying to deal with just the lack of talent in some areas and very much still feeling that great resignation sense in certain sectors. So 42% said they are very much in growth mode and hiring, and 17% are considering hiring freeze or layoffs, and 8% have gone ahead and imposed a hiring freeze. Okay, yeah, it's a really interesting situation. There was a great piece that Josh Burson published recently about that very whiplash, about, we're just kind of off of this great resignation turnover tsunami, Q3, Q4 of last year, Q1 certainly, and then kind of as we headed into the end of Q2, starting to feel that sense of all the open jobs, all the growth, all the recruiting coming for many organizations to a screeching halt. So no one is really quite sure what is coming next from the economy. Many of the economists that we follow are talking about things kind of easing up towards Q2 of next year, and very much hoping that, at that point, organizations feel like they're on steadier ground. But whatever we're calling it, a mild recession, a soft recession, that combined with inflation certainly has a lot of us on our toes. And we've heard from so many of our clients that they're moving into this hiring freeze space. Especially, we've all read about the tech space having that, companies like Meta and Intel and Salesforce. And you can actually look up layoffs on this layoff tracker that we follow to see more than 600 startups who've imposed layoffs since 2022. We'll pop that in the chat for anyone who just wants to kind of see what's going on out there. So I'd love to kind of dive into this again when we think about what's keeping us up at night and this whiplash. This is what we hear is most top of mind for our high growth clients. So I'd love to hear what does this kind of climate of uncertainty mean for HR and business leaders, who are in growth mode? They want to sustain that growth. They want to grow in a smart and sustainable way. How do we approach this kind of climate of uncertainty? Nettie, if we could begin with you.
Thank you. So we're working with a lot of companies that are right here, that they are in growth mode, hyper growth mode for some of them. And some of them are still rebounding from challenges that they've had during COVID, which has brought actually a lot of uncertainty into their organizations where everybody was remote. And now they're asking people to come to the office, or some are staying remote and trying to still figure out that hybrid culture. And we have one particular company, we just did a culture survey with them to really understand how people were feeling and doing some due diligence, in terms of, I feel if I'm not like at headquarters, I'm not being seen, which is happening a lot. So I think that some of that comes back to the company and how are they talking about that? Some of them have to relook at things from the past and say, okay, we were really productive and people want to work from home and are just as productive working from home and don't want to travel into the office. So that's one of the areas that we're really starting to see it happen. The other thing that I've seen happen, and I'm sure every one of us on the panel has, is that HR is not sitting at the table. We need to ensure that HR leaders are part of the executive leadership team, that they have a voice, that they are in alignment with the CEO, the COO, the CFO, that they're working together as a team and looking at what are our strategies? How are we going to handle this? Where are we recruiting from? Go back to the DEIB conversation. Are you just looking in your local area versus, looking out into the Midwest, the West Coast, the Southeast, the Southwest? Are you going to historically Black colleges or universities looking for those diverse candidates? So I think that, really thinking ahead and planning it versus just doing it off the cuff is really something that has to be done coming out of COVID. And now we're going back into the fall. And I read something today that it's not a COVID emergency anymore, but then again, who knows what's going on. So I think those are some things I would, suggest leaders really think about in terms of our current climate, what's going on, and very strategically plan for what are we going to do next.
Such a good point. As we all experienced when the pandemic first hit, in March of 2020, there were so many hiring freezes and so many layoffs. And then when the economy got crazy strong in 20 and 21, so many organizations had record growth. Organizations, one, had lost a lot of trust between them and their employee base, as well as their customers, that they had laid so many folks off. And while we all understood the economics of the need to do so, they had that kind of emotional impact on their stakeholders. In addition, they then were in a jam trying to find talent, and folks were not running to go work at those companies that had done these very fast layoffs. So what we're just coaching clients to do is, to every extent possible, just slow their roll with any type of layoff considerations, because history does repeat itself, and the economy will very much bounce back at full swing, and they don't want to have that type of reputational damage as an employer. So there's a lot of different things to weigh in making these very difficult decisions.
I'm sorry, just
Please.
one other thing that,
Yeah.
that triggered is be honest as a company. Like, you know, don't, my daughter has been through this. The company, they lost a client, they lost another client. We're not going to lay off. And then the next week they're starting to lay off people. I mean, be transparent. You know, this has really affected our company. This is really going to affect our business. And we're trying to figure out what our next step is. Not that, oh, we're not going to fire anybody. And then we are. You've totally lost the trust in that organization as well. Sorry.
No,
I'm going to come at it from a completely different angle, because for every COVID, there's a Zoom, and you might find yourself still in a growth mode during a tough time. So if you're one of those companies and you're still growing, I just think about Warren Buffett during the Great Recession, and what was he doing? He was buying everything he could buy. And it is an opportunity when these things happen for you to acquire talent that you might not otherwise be able to acquire during regular times. You know, if you're still in a growth mode, if you're still looking to add talent, be aggressive and know where you're going to find that talent. You're usually going to be able to be more, aggressive with your talent strategy, with acquiring people who might help you build that growth when other companies are struggling. So I know that's a very niche, very unique situation, but it does happen regardless of the economic circumstances.
Absolutely. And I think it's a time to also think about passive candidates, right? So if high talent, if a treasured person with a fantastic skill set is at an organization that's going through some of the mishigas that Nettie's daughter's company went through, like it really, it might be the right time to do a reach out and ask if someone would want to very much catch up. Yeah. I think that, my factory setting is optimist. That's just kind of how I'm wired, but I think there is forever always opportunities. And I love what you said, for every COVID, there's a Zoom, there's a Peloton, like there are just businesses that can grow. The healthcare industry, I mean, there is so much going on with the needs for, within the healthcare organizations and all the ancillary services in a way that they were not in the spotlight years ago. So many of our clients in the healthcare space have had a spike in the need for, traction, retention, all of that. So kind of looking for those opportunities. Okay, Krupa, any thoughts from you?
Yeah, I mean, I think the HR team, people team, their job is so fast-paced, dynamic, always on, almost seems like whenever there is a downturn or, slight economic recession or whatever's going on in the world, it seems like we have more initiatives on our plate than ever. And so our roles are always even more busier than usual. And I would agree with comments that both Nettie and Sean made in terms of like investing in your people. This is the time to really go back and invest in the people that you have. How can you continue to develop them and further their success with your organization? But then also think about, the passive approach. If you've never tried something and now is a good time to try something out and see if this is a method that might work. But when this sort of opportunity presents itself, this is a great time to at least try new things that we perhaps may not have been able to do in the past.
Absolutely. We've about 10 minutes left. I want to switch quickly to M&A. So I'd love to talk about the role of M&A and all the change management that goes with it. I'd love to hear from each of you. What is one strategy that you can use for kind of the pre with the due diligence and the post with the integration? Is there kind of a common pitfall that you've learned over the years that we can avoid? Sean, as our M&A guru, for the Inspire team, I'll kick it over to you.
Yeah, I think the first piece, kind of the pre, is you've got to have a playbook. You've got to know what you're looking for. You've got to know what you're looking at. You've got to know what your outcome's going to be before you even start, because you have to make some pretty hard decisions very early with limited information. So the more rigorous you can be about it, I think the better off you're going to be. And then as it's happening, I'd say two things. One is to over communicate. It's going to be difficult. People are going to be unhappy. People are going to end up being impacted by a merger. And you have to be clear with communication. You have to make sure that your managers know what to say, know who to communicate to, and that you're empowering them Because one of the things we've learned working with ST6 is that we can't do it all. We need the managers in the businesses to help carry that message forward. So really engage them and bring them along. And back to rigor, have a really good knowledge transfer process as people are learning about the new companies as they come in, as some people are exiting. Just really follow through and make sure that people are clear what their expectations are about how they teach and how they bring their colleagues along.
Great. Krupa?
All I would add is that, don't skimp out on the post learnings process. There is so much good, valuable information that comes out of it. And by that time, most people are tired and just glad and excited that it's over and, happy about everything that's transpired in most cases. But this is a great opportunity for lessons learned, because inevitably we will experience the same or similar type of experience again. And when someone goes back and says, oh, I think we had something like this before, but can't really articulate what we learned. This is a great time to, unfortunately spend an hour or whatever it is and really debrief, because there are so many good takeaways and you will need them at some other point in your firm's life cycle. And I think it's really great to just, memorialize that.
I love that. Don't get caught in the deal is done hangover, where you just, you're like so high on the joy of it and it being complete that you don't take a moment. I love it. You know what I'm a fan of? Sometimes I'll just also grab my phone and auto dictate, so I don't have the strength to kind of type it all out. At least I've captured through an audio file to myself all the lessons learned. And when I am more clear-minded, I can type those up using spell check. Nettie.
So two things that come to mind in terms of the pre is, as you're going through this and you know what's going to happen, help your leaders go through that process as well, and how, in terms of how they can manage the change that their employees are going through. I think that's critical. I think we forget that piece of it, because the company's going through it, but all of the people are going through it as well. And there's a lot of uncertainty in terms of what it was, what we're going through now, and what it's going to be. The second piece is, don't have stepchilds. When you join or merging two companies or many companies together, there's always that company that gets left out. Like they're not onboarded. They don't feel connected. And, whatever you can do, create an opportunity to have everybody feel like they're part of who this new organization is. Even if there's different names, still connect them. They're still going to be part of this larger group of folks, and they don't want to feel like the stepchild. So
great advice. Thank you. We're going to go to Q&A in a moment. There were some glitches with Zoom, so perhaps some of them, I think folks had some trouble putting their questions into chat. But we always like to wrap up our live series asking a bit about self-care. We are self-care obsessed at Inspire. It's part of Inspire's Wellbeing Pledge to kind of take care of ourselves and make time to do that, so that we can have the strength to do the important work that we need to for our families and our clients. And I don't know if you knew this, but September is Self-Care Awareness Month. So with that, I'd love to hear quickly from each of you, what do you do for self-care? Krupa, what do you do to take care of Krupa?
Well, can I just say briefly, I love that you asked that question in every call, Jamie, because it's so important to bring it back to top of mind. And I always look forward to hearing that, like, do that again. So thank you for always asking that. For me personally, I've started to just force myself to read again. I love reading. Never really had the time in the last 18 months to do it. But now it's something that I make sure that I do at least a few pages every night before I go to bed. Not enough, but it's a start.
Beautiful. Do you know, I found myself at my local library yesterday for that exact reason, to challenge myself to find a pile of great books that are not work related, but just to let my mind wander. Sean.
Well, this may be a promotion for Inspire, but I think one of the things I love about working at Inspire is that I can control my work and my work time. And so I like to call myself like a 400-meter runner. Like I sprint at full speed for like 4 to 6 months, and then I take some time off. So that's a little unique. I know that's not going to be everybody's work model, but the lesson that it taught me was that we work in a function which has a lot of emotional stress, and there's a lot of times where it builds and builds and builds, and you need some way to relieve that. And so whatever you're doing when you have time off, make sure that that emotional stress that builds up working in HR, that you have a release, that you have the ability to kind of wipe the slate and restart and refresh when you're back. So use make the most of the time that you do have off.
Such good advice. And we love having you on the team for your sprints. And Nettie.
So number one, The Personal Librarian is an amazing book. If you have not read it, I'm reading it right now. I moved about 4 months ago, so I'm in a new city trying to figure everything out. It's been very stressful. And I finally committed to going back to do yoga. And I've actually selected Monday and Wednesdays to do it. Go to the gym on Tuesday, Thursdays. So I'm really, really forcing myself to be in a schedule. And it's so nice because I kind of don't have to think about it anymore.
Is that great? It's like that. And that accountability is now there because you said it on our live series. So
Yes.
hey, I'm going to text you.
So people check in with me.
I love it. I thank you for sharing. This is fantastic. So before we get into questions, were submitted, just a quick reminder, you can always reach us at hello@inspirehumanresources.com. Talk to myself or Karen Harwood, our chief of staff, about anything that's keeping you up at night or anything that we covered. So question, this is like a speed round. Can you talk a bit about the ROI around greater total rewards and benefits if there are tight margins? Leaders don't want to sacrifice profitability or retention. Any thoughts on that one? ROI.
I'll just jump in.
Please.
Not everything costs money, right? And I will never forget, one of the executives at American Express asked me at dinner one night, and it was kind of a in-your-face question: what's the most important thing about total rewards? And I stumbled through an answer and value and et cetera. And he said, it's the highest perceived value for the lowest actual cost. And I said, if that's your approach, then there's lots of ways that you can add value and have employees engaged without spending a lot of money. So I think it's just creativity. I mean, I think that's the answer. You don't have to just throw money at everything. It's again, back to the inclusivity point. Find out what your employees want and find out ways to give it to them without spending money.
Yep. Well said. Next, how do you structure policies so as the company grows, you ensure people come first and aren't always behind the business and bottom line?
Your company needs to be a people first company. That needs to be part of who your culture is. You need to say it. You need to walk the walk and talk the talk, and remind yourself every day as you're growing that, people are your human capital. They are your business. Without them, you don't have a business. So
Well said. Well said. Okay, next up, as we create our 23 budget, how do you expect inflation to impact merit bonus payouts? Oh gosh, if anyone had the crystal ball on that one, I would love it. This is such a great question. Does anyone have a point of view on that?
We're talking about it. We're talking about it internally. We're talking about it with our peers. Honestly, I think it's so company specific. I don't think it's really like a one size fits all type of answer.
Yeah. What I would say though, as this has come up for clients, we've just touched on the transparency thing that Nettie mentioned. I think the bravest thing you can do is let folks know how things are going against your revenue goals, to just begin to set expectations of what things could look like for future bonuses. Are quirky perks like air hockey tables and bars on site still common, or do they matter in enticing people back to the office, or are more founders seeing remote work as the number one perk their talent wants now? And this will be our last question.
Number 2.
Yeah, hybrid. I think
Hybrid.
Actually,
Yeah,
I
Hybrid.
think finding ways to have it be hybrid, because I do think that the Zoom working is it's only sustainable to a certain extent, and people need to have some sort of most people need some sort of human interaction. So I think trying to find the hybrid answers is the way to go.
Okay. All right.
I want to add the one thing to that. It's when we do learning and development, or we're having calls where there's people in a conference room and there's people on Zoom, you can't, it's very difficult for equity because not
Yep.
everybody's on the screen. So I
Mhm.
think that that's something else that we need to think about is how do you create equity in a hybrid
Yes.
environment? And I'm just going to leave it at that. So
Absolutely. Absolutely. And there is so much to say on that and other things related to high growth. We certainly are not done, and we will be back October 4th with a kind of a part 2 on the opportunities and challenges for high growth companies, where we're going to touch on things that are really hot, especially for the New York City area, around pay transparency and total reward strategies as we go into Q4. Thank you so much for being with us, Nettie, Sean, and Krupa. It's so good to have you here. Thanks for sharing your wisdom. For everyone else, stay healthy, take good care, and we'll see you October 4th. Be well. Bye-bye.